Hello, I'm Kate Valentine. And at our last family dinner, my parents told a room full of strangers that I wasn't smart enough to inherit the empire I helped build, an $8 billion AI company. They toasted my siblings. They applauded themselves. And they forgot to check whose name was on every patent. In 5 minutes, I destroyed their illusion. But what came after was worse than any dinner betrayal. Because what do you do when your family doesn't just forget you? They erase you? And what if you were never quiet, just waiting? What happens when silence becomes the loudest response of all? Let them finish their dinner. I already started cooking something else. That line kept circling in my head as I drove home, fingers gripping the steering wheel tighter than I should have. Outside the window, the lights of Menlo Park flickered like they were mocking me. Warm homes, families smiling inside, everything looking perfectly intact. Just like the facade my own family projected tonight. I didn't turn on the radio. Silence helped me hear everything again. Seraphine raising her glass like a queen bestowing honor, announcing the sale of the company she and my father built with the pride of someone presenting their life's masterpiece. Only, when it came time to speak of legacy, of who would carry it forward, I was left out of the picture. Again. I had seen it coming, but somehow it still hit me with the same chill as that first time I heard her say, "Kate's not leadership material. She's more support." That was 5 years ago, at an off-site team dinner. She said it like she was complimenting me. I smiled then. I didn't tonight. After I parked in my driveway, I didn't go inside right away. I sat in the car with the engine running, staring at the little gift bag they'd handed me during dessert. "A token of gratitude for all our children," Seraphine had said, placing it gently beside my wine glass like she hadn't just gutted me 20 minutes earlier. Inside the house, I dropped my heels by the door and peeled off my blazer. The condo felt smaller tonight, or maybe I felt more enormous inside my anger. I tossed my keys onto the counter, turned on one warm lamp, and set the gift bag down like it might explode. It did. Inside was a midnight blue envelope, embossed with our family crest, Valentine Dynamics, classic Seraphine branding. I opened it slowly, not because I was afraid, but because I already knew it would sting. It wasn't a check, not a thank you letter. It was a legal document, a release form, a waiver, a polite suggestion that I relinquish any claims to intellectual property in the spirit of family unity and streamlining acquisition terms. Streamlining. The word felt like poison behind my teeth. Beneath the document, a handwritten note, Valora's signature curls unmistakable. "Let's keep things simple. You never really belonged anyway." I stared at those words longer than I should have. Then I took the whole thing and slid it under the base of my kettle. Let it sit there. Let it burn when the water boiled. Hours passed. I didn't sleep. Just paced. Thought. Replayed the moment when my name wasn't mentioned in the toast. Not even a sideways glance. No nod to the years I spent in development trenches, writing the lines of code their new investors were now clapping for. Around 4 a.m, I powered up my backup drive. There, among the archive folders, was one called Legacy_Backbone. And within that, all 14 patents, each filed under a shell corporation I'd registered 3 years ago. Every name, every innovation mine. They wanted clean. I would give them clarity. Later that morning, I checked the guest list from the internal system out of habit. That's when I saw it. My name. Katie Valen. Not even spelled right. Not even in the main column. Listed under Administrative Logistics. I laughed. A real one. Short, sharp, echoing off my kitchen tile. They didn't forget me. They made me disappear. Before lunch, a colleague messaged me, someone from the old dev team. "Missed you at the gala. Thought you'd be front row." I typed a reply, deleted it, typed it again, then sent nothing. Instead, I grabbed the certificate that came in my box of office belongings 2 months ago, the one labeled Recognition for Administrative Contribution. I taped it on the fridge, next to a grocery list. Later that evening, I pulled out the documents again, reviewed them all, cross-checked with our family trust filings, pulled corporate registration details on the holding entity. Nothing needed changing. Everything was already perfect. While making tea, the envelope from the night before started to curl from the heat. The corner began to blacken. I let it. Then I sat at the small dining table in my kitchen, the same one I assembled with my own hands when I moved in, before I could afford the nicer furniture. I opened a clean folder. At the top, I wrote in bold marker, "Timeline for transfer notification." The first item, final announcement dinner, 3 days from now. Second, IP verification statement, signed and dated. Third, envelope, delivered at the table. I closed the folder, took a long sip of tea, and said aloud, just to myself, just to the room, "They think this ends with dessert. They don't know I've already served the main course." By the time they finished dessert, I had already unwrapped the gift that would prove how little they understood me. The drive home from that dinner felt longer than usual, though the roads were nearly empty. I remember counting the streetlights just to keep my mind from replaying the scene again. Valora's smirk, Seraphine's glass raised like a gavel, the polite clinking of forks against china while my name disappeared between the pauses of conversation. When I finally reached my condo, the city had gone still. Palo Alto always went quiet after midnight, just the faint hum of tech offices and the occasional coyote cry echoing from the hills. I carried the small gift bag inside, setting it on my kitchen counter like it might be a bomb. My heels came off first, then the jacket, then the pretense that everything was fine. I took a breath, poured a glass of water, and stared at the bag. "They haven't given me anything personal in years," I murmured. The thought alone made me smile, not from amusement, but disbelief. When I finally reached inside, the sound of tissue paper felt too loud in the quiet apartment. My hands brushed against something smooth, an envelope. Navy blue, thick, expensive paper, embossed with the company crest, Valentine Dynamics. For a second, I hoped it might be a note, maybe even an apology tucked between corporate nonsense. Foolish. I slid the paper out. Inside was a legal document, typed in the sterile language only lawyers could love. Release of intellectual property rights. It read like an obituary for everything I'd ever created. At the bottom was a blank line waiting for my signature. No greeting. No explanation. Just a command disguised as family unity. Attached was a note written in Valora's perfect handwriting. "Let's keep things simple. You never really belonged anyway." It took me a few seconds to process the neat cruelty of it. How deliberate the choice of words was. You never really belonged. As if the years I spent coding through the night, building the neural cores that powered our entire product line, meant nothing. I folded the document in half, then in half again, pressing the creases sharply with my thumb. My kettle was still sitting on the stove from this morning. I lifted the metal lid, slid the folded paper underneath, and turned the heat on low. When the metal began to warm, I stood there watching the envelope's edge start to brown. The smell of burning ink filled the air. I didn't cry. I didn't even blink. I just let it smolder until the edges curled into ash. Then I opened the window and let the smoke drift out into the night. My phone buzzed on the counter, an unknown number. I ignored it. Instead, I found myself walking to my bookshelf, drawn to an old photo album I hadn't opened in years. The first picture was from my 8th birthday. The cake said, "Happy birthday, Preston and Valora." No, Kate. I remember that day vividly. Mom had smiled and said, "The bakery must have made a mistake." But she hadn't looked surprised, just slightly annoyed that I noticed. It was strange how memories returned when the present hurt the same way. Different stage, same silence. By dawn, the city began to hum again. I hadn't slept, but I made coffee anyway. The bitterness felt fitting. I sat at my dining table, laptop open, reading through the morning emails. One caught my eye, a message from an old colleague at the company. "We missed you at the gala last night. Thought you'd be front row." The words punched harder than they should have. I hadn't even known there was a gala. Curious, I logged into the company's internal system. The guest list popped up easily enough, public to all staff. I scrolled until I saw my name, or rather, Katie Vallon, misspelled. categorized under administrative logistics. So that's what I'd become to them, a typo. The realization didn't bring anger this time. It brought clarity. Every slight, every omission. It wasn't an accident. It was a design. A carefully built pattern of erasure dressed as oversight. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen, the cursor blinking like a heartbeat. The city outside had turned gold with morning light. My apartment looked smaller now, but not because it lacked space, because I suddenly saw how much I had outgrown it. Before I shut the laptop, I took one last look at the guest list and whispered, "You made me invisible. That was your mistake." I spent the next few hours sorting through folders stacked against the wall of my small home office. Years of prototypes, test reports, data models, everything that had built the foundation of Valcor, the AI system that powered our products. My products. I unlocked the metal drawer at the bottom and pulled out a plain black binder labeled Valcor V.2. The next-generation framework no one knew I'd been building. Each page inside was hand-annotated, marked with updates I'd made quietly after hours, revisions that bypassed the company's servers entirely. My initials signed each schematic, my fingerprints on every piece of logic. I took the waiver from last night, now charred and half-melted, and slid it into the shredder. The noise filled the room, steady and final. Not dramatic, just decisive. The paper disappeared strip by strip until there was nothing left to read. Then I sat back down, opened my notebook, and began drafting what would come next. Timelines, delivery triggers, document transfers. I didn't have a plan for revenge. I had a plan for truth. There was a difference. Sometime around noon, the sunlight fell across my desk in long, soft stripes. Dust floated in the air like faint reminders of every sleepless night that had brought me here. I picked up my pen, wrote one line at the top of the new page, and said it aloud as the ink met paper. "You'll remember my name, not because I asked you to, but because I built yours." That night, I stopped trying to get back in and started building my own exit. 3 days earlier, before the dinner that would burn every last illusion to ash, I was sitting in a row of uncomfortable leather chairs at the back of the main auditorium at Valentine Dynamics. They'd called it a preview session for select internal staff to showcase the company's legacy in a polished new video before the sale was finalized. It was supposed to be a celebration. What I didn't know then was that it would serve as my final lesson in how erasure isn't passive, it's executed. The lights dimmed. A hush fell over the room. High-definition clips rolled across the screen. Sleek, nostalgic shots of our labs, archived footage of product launches, interviews with founding team members. I leaned forward slightly, waiting. I watched Valora deliver an impassioned speech in perfect lighting, hands poised like she'd been born to spin truth into performance. I saw our father standing tall beside a prototype of our earliest AI interface, praising the visionaries that brought it to life. I waited some more, and then I realized there was no Kate. Not even a passing mention. Not a photograph, not a single voiceover line. No credit on the first neural net framework, no timeline placement for the adaptive intelligence module I personally built over 16 months. It wasn't missing. It had been deleted. They didn't forget me. I whispered to myself in the dark, barely moving my lips. They edited me out. The moment didn't feel like betrayal. It felt like watching someone return a gift you gave them years ago and claim they never needed it in the first place. I sat frozen as the applause echoed, a tight rhythm of approval from people who knew exactly what they were clapping for and what had been intentionally excluded. When the lights came back on, no one looked my way. Maybe they didn't see me back there. Maybe they'd been told not to. I stood quietly, walked toward the office wing out of habit, and reached for my keycard. The scanner blinked red. I tried again. Nothing. A young assistant I barely recognized passed by and froze when she saw me. "Oh, hi, Miss Valentine. Sorry, I think that section's been reassigned for renovations or something." Facilities didn't give me details. I didn't answer. I didn't even frown. I just turned around, retraced my steps to the front desk. That's where I found the box. Brown, standard issue, taped sloppily on the sides. Inside were my nameplate, a cracked mug that said "Code like a girl," and a framed certificate. "Thank you for your administrative contributions." The kind of thing they hand out when they're done pretending you matter. I carried the box out without saying a word. No one stopped me. No one noticed. That was the part that stung. Not the disrespect, but the absence of resistance. They had already moved on. I just hadn't been told. I loaded the box into the passenger seat, closed the door gently, and started the car. The engine hummed as I merged into traffic, and I made no plans to stop anywhere along the way. As I drove past the Stamford turnoff, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the side window. No tears. No outrage. Just a stillness I hadn't felt before. The kind that comes not from shock, but from certainty. So this is what legacy theft looks like. And in that moment, something inside me clicked into place. Not out of spite. Not even revenge. Just a shift. A silent rerouting. That night, back at my condo, I laid the box down on the floor of my home office and stood over it for a long time. Then I opened the bottom drawer of the filing cabinet, the one I hadn't touched in over a year. Inside was the original outline for Valcore version 2, my system, my enhancements, my proof. None of it was stored on their servers. No fingerprints except mine. I took a pen and wrote across the top in large, deliberate letters. Kate Valentine Holdings, confidential. For the next 5 hours, I outlined the specs in order. Algorithm structures, adaptive learning modules, licensing flow, every legal route that would tie these designs to my name, not theirs. And this time, it wouldn't be hidden under the company's banner. I didn't need to be their daughter in press releases. I didn't need to be their subordinate or their afterthought. I just needed to make sure that when the final version of history was written, the record would be undeniable. At some point during that night, I opened the windows to let the air move through the room. Palo Alto nights weren't known for being romantic, but something about the cool breeze and the smell of distant redwoods made me feel grounded again. In the quiet hum of my workspace, I whispered one final thing into the stillness. No more seats at their table. I'm building my own. And that was the real beginning. 3 days before that dinner, the same one that would eventually burn away any illusion of family, I received an unexpected email. The subject line read, "Strategic Consultation, AI Ethics Integration." It came from Preston, my brother, the one who used to share late-night ramen with me in college while we argued about algorithms and who was better at math. I almost didn't open it. We hadn't spoken in weeks. But the word strategic hooked me. It sounded like the kind of meeting where my presence would either mean inclusion or judgment. I told myself it could be an opportunity to rebuild some sort of trust, maybe even remind them of the person they'd buried behind their press releases. So I replied, "I'll be there." The next morning, I dressed carefully, nothing showy, nothing they could call emotional or defensive. Just neutral, professional. Gray suit, hair tied back, a small folder of documents containing data models I had personally improved for the Valcore architecture. The work was airtight. Numbers don't lie. I did not plan to either. When I entered the boardroom, the air was cool and stale. Glass walls framed the skyline, and every chair around the long marble table was already filled. Preston looked up first. "Hey, you made it," he said, his voice casual, friendly even. He smiled the kind of smile that used to mean we were in on the same secret. "Wouldn't miss it," I said, taking the only empty seat left, at the far end of the table. Seraphine was there too, her tablet in hand, glasses perched low on her nose. She gave me the faintest nod, the kind that meant behave. The meeting began. A senior consultant droned on about ethical frameworks for autonomous decision-making, using jargon that barely scratched the surface of what I'd already solved 2 years ago. I listened quietly, flipping through my notes. Eventually, Seraphine gestured toward me. "Kate's been working with these systems for years," she said sweetly. "Perhaps she can give us insight into integrating ethical guardrails." It sounded like inclusion. It wasn't. I stood, turned on the small projector, and displayed a simplified map of my neural architecture, layers of adaptive logic designed to learn contextual bias and correct itself in real time. This module can predict moral conflict points before deployment, I explained. We can teach it context rather than rigid instruction. Seraphine cut me off mid-sentence. We've already moved past legacy systems, dear. We're focusing on the next phase of development. Your model's very classic. Classic? I asked, keeping my tone even. Yes, Preston chimed in, not even looking at me. We're optimizing, you know? Streamlining. We need scalable intelligence, stuff that can evolve beyond manual oversight. My throat went dry, but not from nerves. From recognition. This wasn't a consultation. It was theater. A public dismissal disguised as collaboration. So, you're saying the model that runs your entire infrastructure, my model, is obsolete? Preston finally met my eyes, then looked away. It's not personal, Kate. The company just needs people who can lead forward.
People, not me.
The room was silent for a heartbeat. Then chairs shifted, pens clicked, someone coughed. My face stayed neutral, every muscle locked. Inside, though, something small and fragile finally cracked. When the meeting ended, I stayed seated until everyone left. Preston lingered near the door, pretending to read his phone. I caught up to him in the hallway. You asked me to sign off on those patents 2 years ago, I said quietly. Now you're calling them outdated? He exhaled. Kate, come on. You didn't seem interested in leading. You always preferred working in the background. That's because every time I spoke up, you called it noise. Don't do this, he said, lowering his voice. You're overreacting. I smiled, not the kind that hides pain, but the kind that recognizes a lost cause. You mistook quiet for absence, Preston. That's the mistake you'll regret most. He frowned. What does that mean? It means I'm done trying to prove my value to people who'd rather steal it. He didn't follow me when I walked away. Maybe he didn't understand yet. Maybe he did. That evening, I drove straight to the rooftop cafe where Melis liked to work after hours. She was sitting near the edge, her laptop open, the sunset bleeding over the skyline. She didn't need to ask what happened. My expression said enough. They're preparing to sell, I told her. Yeah, she said. The legal filings went public today. I saw Valora's signature on the preliminary statements. Of course. Valora, the family's public face. The woman who turned deception into brand strategy. They're going to try to erase me from the final deal, I said, pulling out a folded sheet of paper, my outline of the company dinner schedule. They'll make their announcement there. A clean break, with me conveniently absent from every mention of contribution. Melis nodded slowly. You think you can stop them? I don't plan to stop them, I said. I plan to outlast them. She leaned forward. Then you're ready for this? I looked out across the city, lights flickering to life below us. Somewhere down there, my family was already celebrating the deal. I'm not preparing to fight, I said. I'm preparing to reclaim. The evening breeze carried the smell of espresso and car exhaust. A string of jazz notes drifted from the open window inside the cafe. Everything felt heavy, but clear. I folded the paper back into my purse, finished my coffee, and stood up. Melis smiled faintly. You know, they'll never see it coming. That's the point, I said. We hugged briefly, the way people do when they both understand the cost of silence. I walked away, heading down the stairwell into the dim parking lot, feeling the tension in my shoulders ease, not because I was safe, but because I was certain. By the time I reached my car, the sky had gone completely dark. My phone buzzed with another message from Preston. You okay? I didn't answer. Instead, I typed something else, a note I'd save as a draft. Every legacy built on lies will eventually collapse under its own story. I hit save, started the engine, and whispered into the night. Not to fight. To reclaim. 72 hours. That's how long I had before the dinner. Before the show. Before my family unveiled their carefully rewritten version of history. I woke early before the sun touched the blinds and sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open, a yellow notepad to my right, and a half-drunk cup of coffee cooling beside it. The house was quiet enough to hear the hum of the refrigerator. I needed silence to think, to align every document, every connection, every patent that bore my work, and more importantly, my name. Each page I pulled up on the screen was a reminder that they thought I'd never learned the game they were playing. The truth was, I had been studying it all along. The timeline stretched across my notepad in neat lines. Core patents, filed under shell entities. Licensing agreements, traced back to holding firms registered offshore. Enforcement triggers, automatic activation upon sale or transfer. Every link, every clause, every buried mechanism that could make or break a billion-dollar acquisition, I had it mapped. I whispered to myself, if I warn them, they'll deny it. If I stay silent, they'll walk right into it. And that was exactly what I needed. As the morning light crept across my table, I moved through my condo, double-checking the printouts taped to my wall. The air smelled like printer toner and black coffee. My phone buzzed with another message from Valora, well, technically her assistant. Family dinner RSVP confirmation. Formal attire. I deleted it without reading further. When I leaned down to plug in my tablet, my elbow brushed against an old stack of notebooks on the shelf. They tumbled forward, knocking a framed photograph off the edge. The glass cracked. It was a photo of my mother, my real mother, the woman who raised me long before Seraphine had even noticed I existed, as more than a convenient narrative. Her smile was small, genuine, the kind that reached her eyes. Behind the cracked glass, I saw something tucked behind the frame. A folded letter. My breath caught as I pulled it out carefully, the paper yellowed at the edges. It was her handwriting, delicate but firm. When they erase you, don't scream. Innovate. Make them rebuild the ground they buried you under. For a long moment, I couldn't move. It felt like the air had gone out of the room. All the composure I'd been building for days fractured. Tears came, quiet, not dramatic, not loud. Just a release. Years of silence unraveling in one steady stream down my cheeks. I sat on the floor with that letter in my lap, reading it again and again until the words felt like armor. My mother had never taught me how to fight. She taught me how to adapt. By the time the sun set that evening, my grief had turned into something sharper, clarity. I changed into jeans, tied my hair back, and drove downtown to see Indira Thompson, a lawyer who had once worked under my mother's supervision at Valentine Dynamics. She now ran her own small firm in a modest office above a bakery. The smell of sugar and cinnamon filled the stairwell. Indira greeted me with her usual calm composure. Kate Valentine, she said, shaking her head with a knowing smile. I was wondering when you'd come knocking. I need legal confirmation, I said, handing her the folder from my bag. Every patent, every trademark, this paperwork proves the filings are in my name. She skimmed through the pages quickly, her eyebrows rising with each document. You were thorough. I had to be. Do you realize what happens when your family finds out the core IP doesn't belong to the company? She asked. Yes, I said. They'll be embarrassed. Then they'll be exposed. Then they'll be erased from the version of history they tried to steal. Indira leaned back in her chair. Kate, once this comes to light, it won't just end careers. It'll destroy reputations. I know. And you're ready for that? I looked her straight in the eye. I stopped wanting their approval a long time ago. She nodded slowly, tapping her pen on the folder. Then I'll draft a verification statement. You'll have it by tomorrow. Make sure it's airtight, I said. It already is. When I left the office, the city was alive again. Traffic lights glowing against the damp pavement, people heading home with takeout and weary smiles. I watched them cross the street, normal lives continuing, untouched by family wars disguised as business. I envied their simplicity for about 5 seconds. Then I smiled to myself. I didn't want normal. I wanted justice. Back home, I made tea and opened my laptop. My inbox was full, press releases, financial reports, updates about the sale I was supposed to be proud of. I ignored them all. Instead, I drafted one short, polite email to Valora. Please ensure that the legacy recognition speech reflects all contributors to the core AI base models. Oversight could trigger legal scrutiny. It was civil, almost too polite. The kind of message that carried more weight than it seemed. I hit send. An hour passed. No reply. I opened my messages and typed a text to Preston. Hope your speech at dinner doesn't leave anyone out. Would be a shame. He replied 3 minutes later. Cute. I could almost hear the smugness behind the single word. I closed my laptop, staring at my own reflection in the dark screen. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even disappointed. I was finished playing their game by their rules. The truth was, the email wasn't meant as a warning. It was evidence. A marker in time. Proof that I had extended courtesy before I claimed my name back. The next morning, as dawn stretched over the bay, I filed Indira's verification statement into my safe, along with the letter from my mother. 2 women who had believed in me when no one else did. One gone. One still fighting in the shadows. I smiled softly. They wanted to make me invisible. Instead, they had forced me to define visibility on my own terms. I poured another cup of coffee, opened my planner, and circled one date in red ink. The dinner. Underneath it, I wrote just 3 words. No more warnings. The email wasn't a warning. It was a timestamp. By the time I drove up to the Menlo Park mansion that evening, the sky had already dipped into that velvet hue between blue and black. The house glowed like a museum piece, its windows spilling gold light onto the gravel drive. Cars lined the front yard, sleek, expensive, all belonging to people who smiled for cameras but wouldn't remember the names of the engineers who made their wealth possible. I parked near the fountain, cut the engine, and sat for a moment in silence. My reflection in the windshield stared back at me, steady, calm. No rage, no fear. Just readiness. The plan had already been set in motion. Inside, laughter floated through the hallways. The smell of roasted lamb and polished oak filled the air. I handed my coat to a house attendant, nodded politely, and made my way toward the dining room. The sound of glass clinking grew louder with each step, like an orchestra tuning for a performance that everyone knew would end off-key. The table stretched longer than I remembered, gleaming under chandeliers that looked like frozen tears. Valora stood near the head of it, radiant in red satin, surrounded by investors and reporters. She caught sight of me, froze for half a beat, then smiled the way you smile at an unwelcome guest who arrived too early. Well, she said, tone sweet as citrus. You made it. I was invited, I replied softly. Wouldn't want to cause a scandal by not showing up. She laughed, a little too quickly, and gestured to the far end of the table. There's a seat for you. Of course there was. Far enough away that I'd look like part of the picture, not the story. As the waitstaff began pouring champagne, Seraphine raised her glass. To new beginnings, she said, voice carrying that same practiced warmth she used on TV interviews. To the legacy of Valentine Dynamics, and to those who built it. My fork paused midair. To those who built it. She didn't look at me. She didn't have to. The guests responded with polite applause. I set my fork down and folded my napkin carefully. I'd expected the insult. It still landed like a blade sharpened years ago. Then Valora stood. Her posture flawless. Every word rehearsed. From our visionary founders to our brilliant product teams, she began, we stand on the shoulders of giants. My mother's genius, my brother's dedication, it all led us here. She didn't mention my name. Not once. The guests nodded along, smiling, sipping their wine. Across the table, Preston avoided my gaze. His glass trembled slightly, but he said nothing. I sat perfectly still, my palms resting flat against the tablecloth. When Valora finished, the room filled with applause again. The rhythm of it was cruel, too loud, too smooth. I waited until it faded, until the next course arrived, until the laughter started up again. Then slowly I stood. Every eye turned to me. I'd like to make a small contribution to this celebration, I said, keeping my tone calm, even polite. Valora blinked. Now's really not the... I kept going. It'll only take a moment. My heels clicked softly as I walked to the center of the table. I placed a cream envelope in front of Seraphine, right beside her untouched dessert spoon. You'll want to read that before dessert, I said. A ripple of confusion spread across the table. Seraphine frowned, sliding the envelope open with careful fingers. She pulled out a stack of legal documents, thick, crisp paper embossed with certification seals. It took her less than 10 seconds to recognize what she was holding. Valora leaned over her shoulder. Her smile vanished. The murmurs began almost immediately. I folded my hands in front of me. What you're looking at, I said, voice still steady, are the legal filings confirming ownership of the core AI patents that power Valentine dynamics. They were registered last year, under my name. For a heartbeat, no one breathed. Then an investor asked, hesitant, I'm sorry, does that mean the company doesn't own its intellectual property? I turned toward him. It means that as of the last fiscal quarter, all proprietary algorithms belong to me personally. The corporation has been using them under a temporary licensing agreement, one that expires tonight. Preston's glass hit the table with a dull thud. Kate, what did you? I asked to be part of this, I said. You refused. So, I built something that couldn't be erased. Seraphine's face drained of color. You can't be serious. Oh, I'm painfully serious, I replied. You've spent years building an empire on other people's work, other people's names. You just forgot some of us learned from watching you. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioning. A reporter, oblivious to the tension, whispered, Should I stop recording? Valora's voice cracked as she said, This is a misunderstanding. No, I said gently. This is documentation. Seraphine stood abruptly. You'd sabotage your own family? I didn't sabotage anyone. I protected my work from being stolen again. If that protection burns the thieves, that's not sabotage, it's consequence. Her hand trembled around her wine glass. You'll regret this. I already did, I said quietly. That's why I stopped waiting for your approval. Someone at the table coughed. The sound echoed like thunder. Valora's lipstick had faded, her composure unraveling. She turned to the investors, her voice shaky. Of course, this can be resolved. It's just a misunderstanding in paperwork. Except it's not, I said. Because when the buyer's legal team does their due diligence tomorrow morning, they'll discover the same thing you just did. And then they'll realize what you sold them isn't yours to sell. For the first time all night, no one looked polished. No one looked powerful. They looked human, small, uncertain, and afraid. Preston finally spoke, voice low. What do you want, Kate? I met his eyes. Nothing from you. He swallowed hard. Then why do this? Because you were all so sure I couldn't. I stepped back from the table, the tension wrapping around me like a cloak I no longer needed to hide under. My heart beat steady, not triumphant, just alive. Then, as if on cue, my phone buzzed in my purse. I pulled it out beneath the table, glancing down at the screen. A message from a name I hadn't seen in years. Liam, junior engineer. Saw your name on the original patent listing tonight. About time. Proud of you. I felt something shift deep inside, a warmth that wasn't revenge, just relief. Recognition. I looked up at the stunned faces around me, then at the chandelier's reflection glimmering across the table. I won't keep you from dessert, I said softly. Enjoy the meal. It's the last one you'll have where the bill isn't in my name. And with that, I turned and walked away, leaving the echo of my heels behind me like a closing curtain. Not revenge. Recognition. The morning after the dinner, I woke to the sound of my phone vibrating across the nightstand like a trapped insect. Sunlight spilled through the blinds, sharp and unforgiving. My eyes were gritty from too little sleep, but something inside me already knew what I would find when I reached for the phone. 27 missed calls. Dozens of texts. Notifications stacked like dominoes, ready to fall the moment I opened one. The first message I read came from Melis. You made headlines. I sat up, heart steady, fingers scrolling through the chaos. There it was, TechBeat, Daily Ledger, CNBC, all carrying the same headline. AI heiress crashes legacy sale with legal bombshell. The lead paragraph described me as the reclusive daughter of the Valentine dynasty who single-handedly dismantled an $8 billion acquisition by revealing a buried ownership structure. Reclusive, quiet, invisible, that word used to sting. Now it sounded like armor. Below that was a statement from the buyer, an international logistics group. Due to discrepancies in intellectual property ownership, the acquisition of Valentine Dynamics has been paused indefinitely.
Paused.
I smiled faintly. Paused was the polite version of dead. My phone lit up again, Seraphine's name. I didn't answer. Then Valora's name. Then Preston's. I turned the phone face down and went to make coffee. The percolator hissed and bubbled, filling the apartment with a rich scent that steadied my breathing. I stood by the window, watching the morning haze lift over the rooftops. They would be scrambling now, calling lawyers, drafting denials, pretending they hadn't just been undone by their own arrogance. I imagined the boardroom, voices raised, hands pointing, Valora pacing like a caged animal. The cup was warm in my hands when my laptop pinged. My inbox flooded with messages from journalists requesting statements, from old coworkers sending clapping emojis, from strangers calling me everything from a hero to a family traitor. I closed it all. Then curiosity won. I turned on the news. There she was, Valora, on a live stream from the company's headquarters. Her hair perfect, her face composed. The PR machine had kicked in fast. This was a simple misunderstanding, she said into the cameras, voice dripping with controlled sweetness. We're working closely with legal teams to clarify the situation. The sale is still in progress. I almost laughed, but then the screen flickered. The reporter interrupted. Valora, we've just received leaked audio allegedly from a private investor meeting last week. Would you like to comment before we play it? Her eyes widened slightly. That's not necessary. But it was too late. The recording played over the broadcast, loud and crisp. Valora's own voice filled my living room. She's a good bug fixer. But that's not genius. That's janitorial. Let her think she's part of it. She's harmless. For a moment, even the reporter stayed silent. The feed cut back to Valora, her face pale under the studio lights. The image froze there, a perfect portrait of humiliation. I turned off the TV, leaned against the counter, and let the quiet fill the space. I didn't feel triumphant. Just finished. Like the end of a storm you'd been standing in too long. By noon, messages began pouring in from inside the company. One read, investors pulling out. Legal just quit. Valora's locked herself in her office. Another, Preston's trying to do damage control, but it's over. They had built a house of glass and lit a match to their own curtains. Outside, sirens wailed faintly in the distance. Maybe a fire somewhere, maybe not. Either way, it felt appropriate. I took my coffee and stepped out onto the balcony. The air was cool, the kind of crisp bay breeze that carried both salt and steel. I could see the skyline from here, all shining ambition and empty glass. Inside, my phone buzzed again. This time, I answered. Kate. Indira's voice was calm, measured. The voice of someone who'd spent the morning watching everything unravel on multiple news feeds. I know, I said before she could continue. It's done, she confirmed. Their control over your work is legally null. The filings went public at dawn. The contracts are being retracted as we speak. I let that sink in. How bad is it? For them?
Catastrophic.
For you? You're clean. No liability, no breach. I nodded, though she couldn't see me. So that's it.
That's it, she said.
Then a pause. You sure you're okay? I laughed softly. You sound disappointed. I'm just impressed. You didn't shout, didn't threaten, didn't warn them. You just waited for the law to speak. I learned that silence lasts longer than shouting, I said. They were never in control, Indira. They just thought I didn't know how to fight. The line went quiet for a moment. Then she said, you might want to stay offline for a while. They'll come crawling, begging for statements, maybe even sympathy. I'm not giving them either, I said. Let them rebuild what's left if they can. After we hung up, I lingered on the balcony, staring at the horizon. The sunlight had shifted, turning everything gold. Somewhere in that glow, I imagined my mother's words, the letter hidden behind the picture frame. When they erase you, don't scream. Innovate. I took a deep breath, then exhaled slowly, letting the last of the tension leave my body. Down below, the world kept moving. Cars honked, people walked dogs, deliveries arrived. Life didn't care about family empires collapsing. It just went on. Inside, my laptop chimed again, another email alert. Against my better judgment, I opened it. It was a message from Preston. We didn't mean for it to go this far. Please pick up when Mom calls. I stared at the screen for a full minute, then typed a single line before deleting it. I wasn't ready for apologies that came only after the cameras started rolling. Instead, I shut the laptop and poured myself another cup of coffee. The taste was bitter but honest. They thought I didn't know how to fight. I just chose not to brawl in public. I didn't win. I just ended the game. A week had passed since the night everything unraveled. Since I'd stood in front of that polished table, laid down my envelope, and walked away from a name they never meant for me to carry. I thought the aftermath would bring peace, or at least stillness, but power never dies quietly. I was sitting in my office in downtown San Francisco that Friday morning, the rain tapping softly against the windows, when the receptionist buzzed through. "Ms. Valentine," she said, hesitant. "Your sister Valora is here." I looked up from my laptop, the cursor blinking on an email draft I left half-written. "Did she have an appointment?" I asked. "No, ma'am. But she said it's urgent. She's waiting in the lobby." Of course she was. I didn't speak for a moment, just let the silence stretch while I glanced at the reflection of the city behind me. The clouds had sunk low today, gray and heavy, pressing down on the glass towers like the sky itself was exhausted by all the lies we'd layered into it. "Let her wait," I said finally. 15 minutes passed. Then 20. I finished 2 emails, checked on a document approval, and sipped from the lukewarm tea I hadn't realized had gone cold. When I finally stood and walked to the lobby, she was still there. Valora looked human.
Not put together.
Not curated. Her makeup was minimal, and her eyes were rimmed in something that wasn't eyeliner. She stood when she saw me. "Kate," she said softly. I didn't offer a greeting. "We can talk here." Her gaze flicked to the glass wall separating the lobby from the rest of my office. "Do you mind if we?" "I do," I said. She nodded, as if expecting that. "Okay." From her tote, she pulled out a document folder and handed it to me. I didn't touch it. "It's a proposal," she said. "A new firm. You and me. Co-founders. Fresh brand. The market still trusts us." "No," I said. She blinked. "You haven't even read it. I don't need to." Her tone shifted, became urgent. "We're sisters, Kate. We can fix this. The media loves a redemption arc. If we frame it right, we could." "Redemption for who?" I asked. "You?
Me?
Or the investors you lied to while calling me a janitor behind closed doors?" Color drained from her cheeks. "I didn't mean." "You did," I said, voice even. "And I kept the recording." She exhaled sharply. "You're angry." "No," I said. "I'm done." I stepped to a side cabinet, opened the top drawer, and pulled out a document. Yellowed slightly at the edges, but crisp. The same legal waiver she'd once disguised as a birthday gift. I walked to the trash can in the corner and let it fall in. No dramatics. No noise. "You made your choice," I said. "Now live in it." Valora didn't speak for a long time. She stared at the trash can like it held a detonator. Then slowly, she looked at me. "You know this will follow me forever," she said. I nodded. "So, did your silence. You were loud only when I couldn't speak." Something flickered behind her eyes. Regret, maybe. Or just recognition. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She didn't throw the tantrum I half expected. She turned on her heels, and the only sound was the soft, hollow rhythm of her footsteps fading down the marble floor. I didn't watch her go. Instead, I walked back to my office, stood in front of the wide window overlooking Montgomery Street. Across the street, a startup had just moved into the corner unit. Young people bustled in and out, laughing, holding laptops, their energy buzzing like electricity. I touched the glass gently, not with nostalgia, but with certainty. For the first time in years, my reflection didn't vanish in the daylight. Back at my desk, I opened a new email and typed.
To Melis.
Subject. Closed loop. It's done. I didn't win. I just ended the game. I hit send, then leaned back, letting the stillness settle around me like something earned. No press release would follow. No victory speech. Just this quiet, exacting truth. What they'd taken from me, I'd reclaimed. Not with revenge, not with fire, but with silence loud enough to rewrite everything they'd tried to erase. After I hit send, I didn't move. I sat there in my office chair, staring at the line I typed to Melis. It's done. I didn't win. I just ended the game. And let the weight of it settle. A week later, I found myself walking along the coastal trail at Half Moon Bay. No meetings. No emails. No press. Just wind, salt, and the sound of waves hitting jagged cliffs below. The sky was soft gray, the air cool enough that I kept my hands tucked in my coat pockets. In one of those pockets was an envelope. It had been waiting for this walk. The sea stretched endlessly to my left, sharp and endless, while on my right, seagulls argued over something in the brush. I kept walking, the envelope pressing lightly against my ribs with every step, like a small, steady reminder of what I carried. After everything that happened, after the dinner, the collapse, the silence that followed, I hadn't tried to chase down control of the company. I hadn't sued for ownership. I hadn't picked up when Seraphine finally called. I didn't want it anymore. Not the legacy they had curated, not the empire built on exclusion and spin. I wanted air. I wanted my name to mean something without needing to be shouted from the rooftops. The letter had arrived 3 days earlier, tucked inside a thin file I found while sorting through the last of my mother's estate papers. It was addressed simply, for Kate, when it matters most. It mattered now. I stopped at a wooden bench perched near the cliff's edge. No one else was around.
Just the wind and the ocean and me.
I sat, unfolded the envelope, and pulled out the letter. The paper was aged, the ink faded slightly, but her handwriting was as familiar as my own. I raised you not to win. I raised you to withstand. You will meet people who want her light dimmed, so theirs looks brighter. Let them try, then shine anyway. When others try to erase you, let your work sign your name louder. I didn't cry. Not this time. I just sat with it, eyes on the horizon, her words soaking through me like sunlight through fog. She'd always known, even before I did. I folded the letter slowly, carefully, and slid it back into the envelope. Then I leaned back, let my head tilt toward the sky, and breathed deep. Life had already started reshaping around me. These days, I was working quietly with independent developers, mostly young, underfunded AI engineers from overlooked communities. Some had been rejected by firms like Valentine Dynamics, others had never applied. We built together. No press. No flash. Just code that worked and minds that mattered. And for the first time, I signed my name on every line. Not as Kate Valentine, not as a daughter or a sister or an echo, but as me. When people reached out, they didn't ask about my family. They asked about what I'd built, what I stood for. It wasn't legacy, not in the traditional sense.
But it was impact. And it was mine.
I still hadn't spoken to Seraphine. Valora's name hadn't popped up again since the day she walked out of my office. I imagined she was nursing her public image back to life, trying to find a new narrative to drape around the ruins of her brand. Preston had sent a message, though.
Short.
Almost timid. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. I didn't answer. Not out of bitterness, but because some bridges were built too poorly to cross again. Letting them go wasn't cruelty, it was survival. I stood from the bench, brushing off my coat, and looked out once more at the Pacific. The wind tugged at my scarf, my coattails, my hair. But I felt grounded.
Solid.
This was what healing looked like. Not perfection, not resolution. Just peace. The kind you make yourself from scratch. As I walked back down the trail, the letter safe again in my pocket, I whispered one final thought to the ocean. Some people inherit companies. Some inherit silence. I turned mine into legacy. Sometimes, the deepest betrayals don't come from strangers. They come from the people who were supposed to love us the most. Kate's story isn't just about revenge. It's about reclaiming your worth when the world tries to erase you.
So, what about you?
Have you ever been the silent one at the table? The one they underestimated, overlooked, or cut out completely? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you believe in the quiet power of standing your ground, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so